Hi everyone and welcome back to a new chess video in which I will go through one of the trappiest and most fun chess openings to play in Blitz, Rapid or even in a classical format. The opening I'm talking about is the Bishop's opening, which starts after move e4, e5, which is the most popular response in online chess, and then the move Bishop to c4. Now there are a lot of variations you can go into from this point, and there is a minefield of traps ahead for the black pieces, but also some traps that white can fall into. In this video I'll go through 10 of them from the white and also the black perspective. Now let's get right into it. Also, before I forget, a quick reminder that if you like the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to help the channel grow and get more people to discover the chess videos. Thanks in advance for watching, have fun! For the first trap we are going to take a look at one of the most played variations for black, which is straight up losing in about 7 moves. It looks dangerous for white, but in fact there's nothing to worry about at all. You can't believe how many times I've seen this in my games. It starts with the move knight f6, which is the most common response. After this we will play d4, which is called the Ponziani gambit. If black decides to take the pawn on e4 with the knight, we are going to take back the pawn on e5 to take away 2 important squares for the black knight to go to. Also, we are going to be threatening some really nice bishop sacrifices on f7, but also the move queen d5, which would threaten checkmate on f7 and attack the knight simultaneously. For example, after they play bishop c5, which is the most common way to respond, to threaten taking on f2, we aren't going to care and threaten checkmate ourselves. After the move queen d5 and bishop takes f2 check, we simply move our king to f1 and threaten to take the knight and bishop together with checkmate on f7. Black is already losing here. For the second trap we are going to take a look at a very dangerous variation for black, which is called the Yurosov gambit. It starts after e4, e5, bishop c4, knight f6, d4, and instead of knight takes e4, the move e takes d4. After this move we can't play queen takes d4 because after knight c6 our queen is kicked away and that would give the opponent a free developing move. Instead we are going to build up the pressure against the pawn on d4 with knight f3. Now if black gets greedy and takes the pawn on e4 with the knight, we will be able to take the pawn on d4 with the queen, winning a tempo on the knight on e4. And you can't believe how many people will play the move knight d6 here to try and put an extra defender on the f7 square and attack the bishop on c4, but this is just wrong. After we castle, we threaten to play rook e1 and check the king that's awkwardly placed in the middle of the board. If the knight takes on c4 anyway and we play rook e1 check, there's only one way to block, which is bishop e7. Now after the queen takes on g7 and threatens to win the rook has to move to f8, after which we can play bishop h6, which threatens to win the rook on f8, because the bishop on e7 is pinned to the king. There's nothing that black can do but play d6 to let the king escape, and this is completely winning for white after queen takes f8 check. The third trap we will be discussing today will be in a similar variation as the one we saw in the second trap. It's also in the Yurosov gambit with e4, e5, bishop c4, knight f6, d4, e takes d4, knight f3, knight takes e4, queen takes e4, and now instead of knight d6, the better move is knight f6. Your first instinct might be to play the move bishop g5 here to pin the knight, but this is not the most optimal move. Right now black has to move knight c6, and after the typical queen h4, they would have d5 to attack the bishop on c4. Now after bishop takes f6, g takes f6, bishop b5, they have to move queen e7, giving our king a check and making us unable to castle. So before we play bishop g5, we want to have played knight c3 to prevent d5. Now after knight c6 we can play queen h4, and after bishop e7 we play bishop g5, landing us in an incredibly trappy position. The best and most common move is d6, after which we castle and bring our rooks to the center. After black castles as well, we can play bishop d3, attacking h7 with the bishop and the queen at the same time. We now threaten to take the knight, after which we threaten checkmate with the queen on h7. If black tries to defend with g6, which looks fine, he's gonna have a lot of trouble. First, we play the move rook h to e1, threatening to take the bishop with the rook, and the knight on f6 afterwards with the bishop. Now, if they block with bishop e6, it looks like they're all out of trouble, but now there's going to be the weirdest looking move ever, and it's the best move. Stockfish finds it the best move. It's incredibly strong. It's the move g4. And now you might not immediately know what this does, but after black plays rook e8, for example, we can now see the purpose. We want to play bishop to f5, and after they take and we take, they take with the bishop, and now our tactic does work. We can now take on e7 with the rook and f6 afterwards, and the whole king side is open, and this leads to a winning attack for white. Now for the fourth trap, we are going back to the starting position of the Eurosoft gambit one more time. After we play the mandatory knight c3 and black replies with bishop e7, we can play bishop to g5 to start trying to exploit a pin on f6 again. When they play d6, we castle long, and if they castle short, I recommend going for queen h4. The knight can now no longer move out of trouble. What happens very often is that black is going to attack our bishop with h6. This leads to some very interesting variations. What happens to be the case is that we can just take the pawn on h6. There are no good discovered attacks with the knight, because we can just defend with our bishop, and then the bishop is no longer attacked and we're just up a pawn. If they take the bishop with the g-pawn, we can take back and start a devastating attack on the king. After a move like bishop e6, we can play rook d4, and the king has nowhere left to go. Knight g4 is the best try for black, but we can just take it, and after they take with the bishop, we can play queen to g6 check to pick up the bishop. The attack is still going on, and black will have to give up more material to keep his king safe. For the fifth trap, we are going to flip the board to take a look at a very common mistake that white players make. After e4, e5 and bishop c4, black's best try to go for an advantage is knight f6, which we've seen before. Now, a lot of people that don't know what they're doing will play knight f3 to attack your pawn on e5. What happens to be the case is that you can just ignore it and take the pawn on e4. Now, after they take the pawn on e5, it looks like they have a strong initiative with two pieces looking at f7. But right now we can just play d5, and after bishop b3 we have queen g5 attacking the white knight and also the pawn on g2. The best try for white is to counterattack our knight with d3, and now we take on g2, and after rook f1 play bishop to h3. Now the only way for them to defend the rook is to play queen e2, and now we can just take the rook with check, and after the queen takes back, we take the queen with the bishop. We are now winning, and everyone should be able to win from this position. For the sixth trap, we are going to flip back to the white side of things. We are going to look at the line we just saw with e4, e5, bishop c4, knight f6 and knight f3. It is wrong for white to play, but there's a tricky sideline which is objectively inferior to other lines, but still very tricky to play. It's after knight takes e4, the move knight c3. This is actually a Stafford gambit, but now with the color reversed. It actually gives white a better version of the Stafford gambit because they have already played bishop to c4. Black is still winning if they find the move f6 to defend the pawn, but they still need to play very accurately afterwards. A more common move is d6, which loses immediately to defend the pawn on e5. Right now white already has a +5 advantage because they can either take the pawn on e5 but also just play the move knight g5 to attack f7. After they defend f7 with bishop e6, we can take with the bishop, and after f takes e6 we play queen f3 to threaten queen f7 checkmate, but also put pressure on the weak pawn on b7. A common way for this to go is for black to defend with queen f6, but now after queen takes b7, the rook is trapped in the corner and we will take it on the next move. Now the 7th trap is one for black again. We are going to look at the main line bishop's opening with e4, e5, bishop c4, knight f6, and instead of knight f3 or d4, which we've seen before, the move d3 to defend the loose pawn on e4. The best response for black is to play c6, and this sets up a d5 push at a later moment, but it also defends our pawn on e5 indirectly after white plays knight f3. We now don't have to worry about defending e5 and can play bishop e7, but now guess what the most played move is? Right, knight takes e5. It's very stupid if you see the tactic, but most are very careless. Of course, we can just play queen a5 check and attack the king and the knight at the same time. After bishop d2, we can just take the knight and are up a piece after 6 moves. The 8th trap is one of my personal favorites, and I have seen this variation on the board so many times. It's a position that can arise out of the bishop's opening with e4, e5, bishop c4 and knight c6. I recommend playing knight c3, and if they play symmetrically and go for bishop c5, they are already in a worse position. It's all because of the move queen g4, which is available because we haven't played knight f3 yet. A lot of people see the queen move out and will reply in a similar fashion. Queen f6 covers g6 and makes the threat to take on f2. But now we will make a move that looks very stupid to many of you at first, but it's actually the best move. Knight d5 attacks the queen and invites her to take the pawn on f2. If the queen was still on d1, this would be a checkmate, but now the king has an escape square on d1 and is actually pretty safe there. The 3 most popular moves in this position all lose on the spot. d6 attacking the queen will allow it to take on g7. But be careful to protect the g4 square at all costs. If you get greedy and take the rook immediately after, you might get tricked with bishop g4. This would bring the king in a lot of danger, and we don't want that. The move g6 is one I see most often to defend the king side, and now the dangerous combination in this position is knight h3 attacking the queen. And as you can see, it doesn't have any squares to go to on the king side. Black can play the intermediate move f5, and when we go queen g5, they have to go to d4. Now the winning combination is to play knight takes c7 check to force the king to f8. After we defend with d3 and they play bishop e7, it looks like the biggest danger is all over, but this is actually a mate in 2. We sacrifice the queen with queen h6 check, and after knight takes h6, bishop takes h6, the king has no more squares to go to and the game is over. For the 9th trap, we are going to take a look at the best answer for black if white decides to play a Ponziani gambit with e4, e5, bishop c4, knight f6 and d4. I myself like to turn this into a mainline Scotch gambit with the move knight c6. And for white I would play e5, after which d5 is the only move for black to keep an advantage. So remember that. After bishop b5, knight e4, the white knight can take on d4 and put pressure on your c6 knight. But no worries, we actually don't have to defend at all, because there is a trap in the position. After we play bishop c5 to threaten to take on f2, if they move their knight, they might think they can win a rook after knight takes c6, bishop takes f2 check, king f1, b takes c6, bishop takes c6 check, and king f8. But do you see what happens if they take on a8? The white king isn't as safe as you might think, because bishop a6 would be checkmate if the queen wasn't the only piece to be able to block. But losing your queen is also completely losing, and you win on the spot. The 10th trap is one of the stupidest ones yet, and it goes against every principle you might have in chess, but all of these moves somehow are theory, which makes me feel like everything I've learned was a lie. After e4, e5, bishop c4, there is a move, bishop c5. And right now the best move is going to look really dumb, but it's actually queen g4 again. A very common response for black is to play g6, but now we are going to play queen f3. And now I know this looks like a cheap trick, but it's the best move. And after they play knight f6, because they see the threat, this is actually already completely wrong. We can now play d4, and after they take, we can play bishop g5, and after bishop e7, e5, this just wins a piece. That's going to be it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed the content. Let me know which of the 10 traps was your favorite and why in the comment section. I'll make sure to reply to every one of your questions, at least I'll try to. Thanks a lot for watching, and I hope to see you back in the next video. Bye bye.